In this video, I will discuss topic 1.2, the elements of life. Of all the elements found in nature, only about 25 elements are essential for life. Of those 25, oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, and nitrogen make up about 95% of what you are made up of. The other 4% include phosphorus, sulfur, calcium, potassium, and then some of the other trace elements. You may remember from your earlier years the term CHOMPS: carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. Organisms must exchange matter with their environment to grow, reproduce, and maintain organization. Atoms and molecules from our environment are necessary to build new molecules. Carbon is the primary element used to build biological molecules, such as carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, nucleic acids. Carbon is also used in the storage compounds and cell formation in all organisms. Essentially, carbon is critical to life on our planet. In addition to carbon, nitrogen is also used to help build proteins and nucleic acids. Phosphorus is used to build nucleic acids and certain types of lipids. The components of biological molecules and their sequence determine the properties of that particular molecule. So a couple of terms I need you to remember. The first one is a monomer. A monomer is a subunit that serves as the building block of a polymer. Polymer is a large molecule consisting of many similar or identical monomers linked together by covalent bonds. So remember that term I talked about in the last presentation, covalent bonds. That is the sharing of electrons between two atoms. The monomers of a carbohydrate are called monosaccharides. These are called simple sugars, things such as glucose. The monomer of proteins are amino acids. And finally, the monomer of a nucleic acid is called a nucleotide. What you'll notice on this slide is the importance of carbon throughout life. As I mentioned before, it's used for carbs, lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins. So what are the bonds that we will study in biology? The bonds can be broken into two groups: the strong bonds, which include the covalent bonds and ionic bonds, and the weaker bonds, which include hydrogen bonds, hydrophobic hydrophilic bonds, and lastly, the van der Waals forces. Just to review, ionic bonds are formed when there's a complete transfer of the valence electron between atoms. So in this situation, you need to have an atom that wants to donate an electron, and you need to have an atom that wants to accept an electron. When this occurs, we form an ionic bond. Ionic bonds occur in sodium chloride or table salt. You can see in the example there on the right hand side, sodium wants to donate because it has an extra valence electron, whereas chlorine lacks a complete valence shell and needs one more electron to complete its shell. Therefore, it's very happy to accept that additional electron from sodium. Covalent bonds is the sharing of electron pairs between atoms. There are two types of covalent bonds. The first pair is the polar covalent bond, and that's what happens in water. Polar covalent bonds occur when the electrons are shared unequally. And that occurs in water because oxygen has a greater electronegative pull. And so even though oxygen and hydrogen share electrons, those electrons spend the majority of their time around the oxygen atom and don't spend very much time around hydrogen. Therefore, water has a partial negative charge, or we call a negative dipole, around the oxygen end of the water molecule, and around the hydrogen end of the water molecule, it has a partial positive charge, or a positive dipole. Therefore, we describe water as a polar molecule, and the properties that make water unique to biology are the result of this polar property. The other type of covalent bond is called a nonpolar covalent bond. In this situation, the electrons are shared truly equally between the two atoms. So you can see the example right here in the hydrogens. Each hydrogen needs one electron to complete its valence shell. Because the two hydrogens are equal, their ability to pull the electrons are equal, and therefore the electrons spend equal amount of time between the two hydrogens, making the overall molecule nonpolar. The next type of bond is called a hydrogen bond. Polar water creates molecular attractions. So in the last slide I talked about what a polar bond is. The polar bond attraction occurs between the positive hydrogen of one water molecule and the negative oxygen in another water molecule. And the last bond interaction I want to talk to you about today is called the van der Waals interactions. Now, these are definitely the weakest interactions. We describe these as polar slight. This is a fleeting attraction between atoms and molecules that are close together. The example of a van der Waals interaction happens when you look at the hairs on the foot of a gecko. Interestingly, a gecko is able to crawl up a wall. And the reason for that is because of these van der Waals interactions. The tiny little hairs on the surface of the foot of the gecko interact with the wall that it's walking upon. And it's these temporary interactions between the atoms that allow it to defy gravity. So similar to hydrogen bond interactions, these are very weak, but when you compound them together, they do add up to quite a lot.